Good morning, everybody. For those who were here last night for Carlo's talk, he totally ruined what I do with my slide preparation, so don't expect anything too fancy here. I guess we don't need a disclosure for this one. When you look at Ted, and when I was thinking about Vinky asked me to do this, his whole professional career, as we know, was really creating a legacy. And if you look at, and I'll just show you some examples of these, but he was very focused and determined, prepared, organized. He knew when to leave places and set up over here in Phoenix, where it's nice in the morning, at least now. And he really, aspired to be a world leader and educator. He was certainly unconventional, but he was an entertainer that really pulled together of a lot of what he could do with a meeting, and a legacy builder, and then obviously a friend to all of us. His mother was a nurse, and if you read his book, he talks about her. And from very early on, she provided him with, his background and what he ought to do. And she always said you had to dress like a professional. And Ted did that. Actually, I put this, what do you call these pocket things that match your tie? I never wear it, but Ted always did. So for the next couple of minutes, I'm going to wear that just in honor of him. See that?
Very nice. Very nice.
Even matches the tie. And he, as a younger guy, excelled at athletics and the band, and actually went to University of Michigan on a band scholarship and on an academic scholarship. So that's a picture of him in the band outfit. And part of his being able to create a legacy, like a lot of other people, very interested in new technologies. And he invented the sternal saw. It's an interesting story if you spend some time and look at the whole thing. And because of his background and the people that he had worked with, and then that saw experience, he was accepted in Houston as DeBakey's first cardiac fellow that he had taken from outside Houston. I had interviewed a lot of people for Ted's 70th birthday. We had it back a number of years ago. And I had about 10 of these people who gave me comments. There were 2 of them when I went through them last night that I could actually show in this audience that wouldn't be offending to one person or the other. But he was always an organizer, and they had this, he loved front tennis, and the story that went around is that he stole some bleachers from the Herman Park and carted them over to where the tournament was, set it up. And if you ever knew Ted, he was always, regardless of any meeting he was at, he'd find a sunspot at lunchtime and he'd be out there. And he did the same thing at Houston. They all talked about how he'd go up to the roof of the building and just sit in the sun at, lunchtime every day. This is another one. Ted was a wild man, did everything. I mean, the real zeal. This is a picture of Ted organized and was very interested in transplants. And obviously, that's a difficult field. They waited a long time to get a heart. And then all the other services really had the same trouble. So he organized 5 operating rooms to be on call. And if they had a patient that came in that was a candidate, they were going to take the heart, the lungs, the kidneys, and the corneas. And Ted actually set this up on his own and actually performed that. They did a heart, a lung, 2 kidneys, and the cornea. And this is a picture of DeBakey right after that. He called a press conference, and during the press conference, DeBakey took all the credit for doing this and never mentioned Ted. And that was when he knew how to leave and had decided to come to Phoenix, when he looked around, and obviously we know this part of the story, creating the Arizona Heart Institute, and all of those independent buildings and what Carlo talked about last night with the outpatient practice and a bunch of things. And Ted had this written in his office up on the 3rd floor, and it was there for several years. I couldn't find the picture that I took of that, but it was Teach, Care, and Pioneer. And the other thing that he always kept around is his old Michigan stuff, so you guys who are Michigan fans recognize the passion behind this. But, you know, the idea of games and keeping people entertained, again, it was part of Ted's legacy. When he came to Arizona, and I don't think Dick's around, but the first person that he hired was a cinematographer, was Dick Williams. And the whole idea of documenting from sort of day one on film and having recorded what went on was part of the way, and we all have seen this, so you understand the success of being able to do that. This is a picture that up on top is, I think that's Dick, who's laying up there with a camera over top. So they rigged up a way to lay there and look down at the OR table. And then the other camera people there, and as Ted was known, he was controversial. He put the first live heart operation on TV and did several other things, was very much in front of the media. And even here, I can remember when I went over to Barrows and I had my neck surgery, I went in there and Ted was on TV. Every day he would do like a 20-minute thing on the local television. It was Ask the Doctor was the show, and he'd answer questions about anything. But just being in that public presence was a big part of what he did. This is a page out of his book, which looks at the First International Congress. That's the flyer for it. And it was set up as a laser meeting. And when I met Ted, we were doing Trimonine was a company in Southern California, and we were doing some work with them at the lasers. And we started a laser course, which was, every 2 months we'd have 60 docs come in and train. And that went on for 3 or 4 years. And very early on, Ted came over and spent an afternoon, and then he came home to Phoenix, and after that he was faculty at that meeting because obviously, like everything else, he did more laser cases than anybody and had the world's, largest study, and that picture of him there holding that hot tip laser was part of that. So the first meeting was here. There was an international laser conference, and then obviously after that translated into what is, was the Arizona Heart meeting. Ted was also, he could play any kind of an instrument. If you'd be out to dinner and go into a hotel, he could find a piano and sit down and start to play and collect a group of people, and did that. It was a very infectious part of what he did. And what he did this meeting when it was over at Arizona Heart, I'm sure everybody recognized, the first night was an entertainment night. He'd be Elvis or he'd be somebody, and they'd have a skit, and he'd be able to play this. That last picture is right before, about a year before he died, but he was part of a local Mamma Mia show and was singing those with him. The other part that we all recognize about Ted is he was a good friend to all of us and would become involved in whatever you were doing. These are pictures of him when we used to go to a Corsica meeting with my son. And these are actually my x-rays. So on the far left is the neck. I had that done about 15 years ago, and I was having trouble. And at that time, Tom Fogarty's son, who's a race car driver, had a neck injury and came here to Barrows, and Ted got him lined up. And then when I talked to Ted about not being able to use my arm and having trouble, he got me to come over. So this was actually, there was a guy by the name of Sontag who invented this, and that's one of his earliest implants, so I still give them follow-ups on that. And then subsequently, about 5 or 6 years later, I had a back surgery at UCLA that didn't work, and then he told me to come back over, and I had that last operation. So I've got like 10 levels that still are not fused, so I got lots of room to go. But where the friendship comes in this, with that last operation, I was really, I could barely get around. And I had that surgery, and I remember waking up at Barrows, and I was still just transported between the recovery room and my room, and the first person I saw was Ted. And throughout that whole thing, he was really very supportive. He brought me to his house over here in Scottsdale, and I stayed in the guest house out back, if you guys remember the parties he used to have. And really just took care of me for 4 days till I could walk and go home. And that's the kind of friendship that there always was, and he put forward to everybody. He was always an organizer, too, and this is a picture of Ted again down in Corsica on the boat. But I had told this story once before, but you may not have heard it, that we used to go to lunch, and he'd like to go across the bay to some restaurant he had picked out, and there were 4 or 5 of us went one day, and we dropped off some guys at the hotel coming back. So Ted's got a good-sized boat, and it's him and I coming back across the bay, and all of a sudden I turned around, Ted's leaning over the side of the boat, and he's sicker than a dog, and he never really said much to anybody, but he had an allergy to mussels, and he had somehow at lunchtime gotten some mussels, and he's now at the risk of me being the pilot of that boat, and I can't run any kind of a boat, let alone, this bigger thing out, and have to dock it and then get him out of that. And by the time we got to where I could throw out the anchor and stop the boat and it'd be in water where we could get out of there, he could barely breathe. I mean, he was in a full anaphylactic shock kind of deal. So I grabbed him, I pulled him out, and I was a lot bigger then, so I could handle him, and got him up to the beach. And luckily, it was lifeguards around there, and people would get reactions to the coral or get bit by something, so they actually had some EpiPens, and I hit him with a couple of those, and he came out of it. But just to talk about his organizational skills and his entertainment, we had always a dinner that night, and I was worn out. I went back to the room and slept, and I figured he did the same, and then I went to the dinner late, and I walked in, and there's Ted with about 100 people around him, and he's playing the spoons, and he would do that, and he could do a musical thing with that gig. So when you talk about creating a legacy, he's really been able to do that. And obviously what Venky's doing here with this meeting is to be able to carry that on, and glad to be part of all that, so thanks.